Who are the sleepers entering training camp that can realistically push to make the Buffalo Bills roster? I have 10 players to keep an eye on today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. The inspiration for today's episode actually comes from a conversation that I had with a member of the Locked On Bills subtext community. And this person straight up asked, like, who are the roster sleepers? Who are the guys that maybe we're not thinking about that have a realistic chance to make this Buffalo Bills squad in 2024? And so I thought to myself, that'd be a great podcast episode. And so I'm coming to you today with 10 players that I consider sleepers, one at almost every position, that I think have a realistic chance to make this roster. And these aren't your household names. We're not talking about Josh Allen and Matt Milano and Ed Oliver and Dion Dawkins today. We are getting to the bottom of the roster, but these guys I think have a realistic path to make it. And so, like I mentioned, 10 players, and I want to give them to you in a specific order. Actually, the order in which I find them to be the most intriguing. And within that, there's kind of an emphasis on the order being realistic in terms of they have a realistic chance to make it or not, but it's really about just intrigue in general. So let's do it. And the one position that I don't have any player to offer to you is quarterback. QB1 is Josh Allen. QB2 is Mitch Trubisky. Shane Buechele is the third quarterback on the roster. I mean, there's nothing to talk about there, but there is something to talk about at every other position, and I want to start with wide receiver. And I actually have two wide receivers that I want to offer. The first one is Tyrell Shavers. Tyrell Shavers is a 2023 undrafted free agent out of San Diego State, so he spent last year on the Bills practice squad. Another big-bodied guy, 6'4", 211, over 33-inch arms. Not a very dynamic athlete, only an RAS score of a 4.36. But this guy played at three different schools. He went to Alabama to start his career. Then he went to Mississippi State. Then he finished his career at San Diego State. Not a super productive career catching the football. Only 66 catches for his college career. Obviously, his best production came late with San Diego State. But where he really made noise in college, and I think this is a big deal in terms of his path to making the Bills roster, was special teams. Over 400 career special teams snaps. He was widely considered a special teams ace. Has the San Diego State record for blocked punts with 3. And that type of stuff, right? Special teams contributions, they can be tiebreakers when you're trying to sort out who your sixth wide receiver is going to be. And so when I look at the Bills wide receiver core and I consider the collection of big-bodied receivers that already exist in Keon Coleman and Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Chase Claypool and Mac Hollins, I don't look at any one of those four and feel overly good about their special teams contributions outside of Mac Hollins. I think Mac Hollins will be a big-time special teams contributor for the Bills. But could Tyrell Shavers bump Chase Claypool? It's possible. Chase Claypool, not much of a proven track record on special teams. I know Sean McDermott has complimented his effort in that capacity to this point in the offseason. But Tyrell Shavers is going to come in with more reps. Plus, he was part of the mix last year with Matthew Smiley. I'm not predicting this, but I think it's possible. You're talking about wide receiver 5 and 6. Could the tiebreaker be the special teams pedigree? And you've heard Brandon Beane on 2 occasions this offseason praise Tyrell Shavers for his effort. He's been around the facility. He's evidently worked very hard. So we'll see. I think he can force the issue here, maybe crash this party when it comes to the wide receiver mix in 2024. I do have one more wide receiver that I want to offer. And in my analysis for Tyrell Shavers, I talked about there's so many big bodies, and if they want to roster a bunch of big bodies, I'm sure there's a special teams emphasis, and so Tyrell Shavers could make it based on special teams. Well, the next player that I want to offer is a guy that has a completely different skill set than pretty much anyone else in this Bills wide receiver core, and that's KJ Hamler. So KJ Hamler, still very young. He turns 25 in July. Was the number 46 pick in the 2020 NFL draft by the Denver Broncos out of Penn State. And he has just had so many different injuries in a very short amount of time. Big-time hamstring issues, a torn ACL, and then a medical condition, and I'm surely not going to pronounce this correctly, but it's pericarditis. So he's had a lot of things. And that's discouraging in projecting him to making this Bills roster, but he does have the pedigree of being a high draft pick, and that wasn't like a surprise to anybody. I think he was widely accepted as a top 50 prospect in that 2020 draft based on his big play ability, right? He was very, very explosive receiver that won down the field and created big plays for Penn State. And I think that's what inspires me to consider KJ Hamler as a roster sleeper, is that he does bring something different to the table. 5'9", 180 pounds, and he's a speed merchant. And he's also had, in his brief NFL career to this point, he's had some opportunities in the return game, including as a punt returner. So I'll stop short of predicting him to make the roster, but if the Bills wanted that other type of profile with speed, shiftiness, explosive plays through just being faster than other people, KJ Hamler seems to be a logical choice. So put KJ Hamler and Tyrell Shavers down to make this roster. And what's funny, if you go back to my first 53-man roster projection after the draft, I had Shavers and Hamler making the roster, or I might have had Isabella. Point being that the signings of Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Chase Claypool changed that, right? But it wasn't that long ago that I was thinking about these guys as realistic roster options. And of course, injuries will dictate a lot of things, but I think you can look at both of those players and find some unique qualities within their skill sets and kind of create the argument. The next player that I want to get into is really different than the other ones. Those guys have very modest NFL resumes. This guy has a big-time NFL resume. And it's linebacker Deion Jones. Deion Jones, 29 years old. He turns 30 in November. Was a second-round pick back in 2016. Number 52 pick out of LSU by the Atlanta Falcons. 6'1", 225. Ran 4.38 in the 40-yard dash. Super dynamic athlete. And he very quickly became a starter and an impact player for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, he was generally regarded as one of the best linebackers in the NFL for like a 5-year stretch. Signed a big contract extension in 2019, 4 years, $57 million. Again, that's 2019. That's a lot of money. And then in 2021, things started to decline, I guess, for Deion Jones. And the root of that was a shoulder injury. And this shoulder injury was been kind of problematic for a few years. Was actually traded to the Browns in 2022, where he played in 11 games with 5 starts. And then in 2023, spent the year with Carolina, 13 games with 3 starts, and actually played a little bit better. So for his career, 91 starts, had some playoff runs with the Falcons. Not that same guy that earned the big contract extension in 2019, But what inspires me with Deion Jones is we're talking about a shoulder injury. And the calling card for him has always been athleticism. Well, I mean, a shoulder injury is not a lower extremity where you're really concerned about explosiveness being completely taken away. I know he's going to be 30 very soon. But I think it's well worth our time to consider him to make this roster. Linebacker depth, as you know, was a problem for the Bills last year because it was so stressed. I mean, your top three guys were basically gone by the end of the year. You lose Milano in week 5. Terrel Bernard can't go against Kansas City in the playoffs. You're signing A.J. Klein off the street. Tyrell Dotson's trying to play on one arm. Dorian Williams wasn't ready to go. Balin Spector gets injured anytime he gets breathed on. I mean, it was tough, right? And so can you correct some of that by having Deion Jones as part of your mix? I know that the Bills will probably roster 6 linebackers, Terrel Bernard and Matt Milano being 2 of them. And then it's a bunch of young players that are really in the mix to be the reserve players. Of course, not considering Nicholas Morrow, who I think will make this team. But you've got a lot of space for guys like Dorian Williams, Balin Spector, Edifwan Ulafosio, who's a draft pick this year as a 5th rounder. Maybe you just want more experience as part of this mix. So that way, if you do experience attrition at that position once again, that you have not only a Nicholas Morrow, but a Deion Jones as well. I think the complicating factor here that pushes me away from Deion Jones as a possibility is the structure of his contract. He signed a 1 year, $1.2 million deal. None of that money is guaranteed. By comparison, Nicholas Morrow has $500,000 guaranteed. Not a complete deal breaker, but it's something to be mindful of. And if you roster Deion Jones, you're pretty much saying no to either Balin Spector or Edifwan Ulafosio. And maybe that makes sense for Balin Spector, who's always injured. Edifwan Ulafosio, he's a draft pick this year. He's had an injury history. It's tough to kind of sort that out, but I can be convinced that there's a place for Deion Jones on this roster. All right, folks, so that's the opening cast of characters. Plenty more to get to, including some trench players and a special teamer coming up on the other side of it. So be sure to stick with me. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, let's get back into it here. The next player is a defensive lineman, and I want to bring up the wrestler, Gable Steveson. This is a fascinating situation. You know Sean McDermott and his love for wrestling and Gable Steveson's status among the wrestling world is a really intriguing marriage. And he's undersized. We don't know how long his arms are. He's never played football. But this dude is one heck of an athlete. And wrestlers understand leverage. They understand how to use their hands. And perhaps there's at least some pass rush upside here. And that's a big thing, right? Like if you can rush, that's intriguing. It's not like he's just a big space eater that is underdeveloped mentally, that doesn't understand how to defend the run. I mean, this guy, shoot this gap, beat this guy, tackle that quarterback, right? Like we can simplify this. And I don't have expectations here. I have honestly no idea what to expect. It's going to be intriguing to watch. But here's why I'm bringing him up. Of course, there is the wrestling factor that matters, but the whole possibility that he could be good, and keeping in mind, I mean, this is a highly accomplished athlete. Olympic gold medalist, the best of the best at whatever he did. This is somebody that knows how to work, is driven. Like, you don't get to that place athletically without being wired a certain way. So in the world where he does flash in preseason, you see some skill and you're like, oh, maybe this is going to be a thing. You're going to be real nervous about exposing him to waivers. And threading the needle could be difficult. I mean, you're the team that gave him this opportunity. But if you're not going to roster him, if you're going to play him in preseason and then plan on waiving him and then hoping to get him back on the practice squad, if he's worth a damn, right? Like, if he goes out and shows things on tape in preseason, other teams are going to be interested. You're talking about interior pass rush. Everybody wants that. And so here's the dilemma. If he's actually showing some promise, can he clear waivers? But is he going to show enough promise where you're actually just going to put him on your roster? And if so, like, what's the consequence there? Because you're not going to roster 6 defensive tackles, I don't think. Is he going to bump Deshaun Williams? I feel like it's a proposition of he's either good and you roster him because you're afraid of exposing him to waivers, or he's not that good and you bring him back to your practice squad and you kind of realize pretty quickly that this is going to be a long road. Fascinating, right? But there's some interesting dynamics there that suggest to me that, hey, maybe, right? Like, maybe. Let's move on to the offensive line, where I have Richard Gouraige down. I've talked about him quite a bit. And what really inspired me to start bringing him up was learning that he's taken guard reps at OTAs. And I think that versatility is going to matter a ton. And so he was a 2023 undrafted free agent out of Florida. He spent last year on the practice squad. And that's good news because we've seen this path of practice squad to the active roster. I mean, for so many players. Quintin Morris, Cam Lewis, Alec Anderson, Ryan Vandemark, Ike Butker. This is definitely a thing, right? And so Richard Gouraige, as a player who spent last year on the practice squad, that I thought had good tape at Florida, that popped at the Senior Bowl, that I thought played good in the preseason last year. You know, could he be the next in line of the Ryan Vandemark, Alec Anderson, Aaron Comer practice squad to roster pipeline? Maybe. Now, he certainly lacks athleticism. And I think those athletic restrictions led to him being undrafted. But if he's going to be able to play guard, I think that's going to matter. And I think he can play guard. In college, he had over 1,100 snaps at left guard. So I'm keeping an eye on him. If he can build on what he showed us last year in preseason, show some versatility, he can make some noise. The next guy is the special teams guy, and that's Jack Browning, the undrafted free agent rookie punter out of San Diego State. Was a walk-on to San Diego State, eventually became a scholarship athlete as a punter. Spent the last 2 seasons as their punter. 45.8 yards per attempt. That's best in school history. That matters because the punt god, Matt Ariza, was also part of this. Has a 42.2 net average. Solid. Was also the place kicker for San Diego State. The last 2 seasons, 35 of 47 on field goals. Was 4 of 6 from beyond 50. He had a 61-yarder in 2023. And so that's cool, right? Like, oh, yeah, he's a punter that also can kick, and you love that idea. The problem there is the holding dynamic, right? If you're the field goal kicker, that means you're not the holder. And you can argue that holding is every bit as important of a function of a punter as punting. You've got to be a skilled and consistent in holding for field goals, right? Those are points. Direct points. And so can he do it? It's the same conversation we had about Matt Ariza when the Bills drafted him. All this talent as a punter, but he was also a kicker, but can he hold? And I'm sure it's not a difficult thing to learn, but reps matter, and anything in life, reps matter. Time on task doing things. You do that, you're going to get better at it. And certainly he's aware that this is a big part of his evaluation and his opportunity is being able to prove that he can hold. And we know that he's gotten those chances to do it for Tyler Bass in OTAs. What's complicating here is Sam Martin. And maybe you don't think Sam Martin's that good. I don't, right? I think maybe he's an average punter. He was streaky last year. But the Bills allowed Sam Martin's 2024 salary to fully guarantee back in March. Now, it's not a ton of money. It's not a ton of money. It's $1.55 million. That's not going to prevent you from moving on if he's not your guy. But it is fully guaranteed. And so he would have to inspire the Bills that not only is he a better option as a punter, but he can come in and hold. And one of the recent narratives that have come out that I don't really understand is some knocks on Sam Martin as a holder. I've never thought that he has issues holding, and he's a long-term NFL punter. I think that's just the latest excuse to make us feel better about Tyler Bass and whatever the heck happened to him last year. Sam Martin was his holder the year that he was really good and got the contract extension, so I'm not buying that Sam Martin all of a sudden can't hold. But I recognize that Jack Browning is meaningful competition for Sam Martin, and if he's got the upside to be better, and if you think Sam Martin's bad, I'm not really concerned about going from bad to bad. I like to go from bad to, hey, maybe this can be better, right? I'm interested there. So Jack Browning, all that to say Jack Browning has a path as an undrafted free agent. All right, I got more players to get to, a safety, a tight end, a running back, and a cornerback. So be sure to stick with me. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. All right, let's get into these other players I have down. The next one is a safety, and that's Dee Delaney. Was an undrafted free agent out of Miami, played corner, then grad transferred to Citadel, bounced around early in his career with the Jaguars, Dolphins, Jets, Washington. He winds up signing with Tampa Bay in 2021, and this is where his career stabilized. He was with the Bucs for 3 seasons as a contributor, 52 games he played in with 5 starts over the last 3 seasons with the Bucs, 3 interceptions and 7 pass breakups in the NFL. And he was targeted a total of 66 times. So 3 interceptions and 7 pass breakups on 66 targets in coverage. Had 14 career interceptions in college. So there's a clear resume of ball production here. And over the last 3 seasons with Tampa Bay, played almost 800 snaps of special teams. So proven special teams background, can play corner, can play safety, has ball skills. Come on. There's something here to be interested in. I think at a minimum, he adds meaningful competition to the bottom of the safety depth chart. You think about guys like Damar Hamlin, Kendall Williamson, maybe Cam Lewis. There's a lot to be intrigued with. Now, I think the Bills will roster 4 safeties, and Taylor Rapp, Mike Edwards, and Cole Bishop are 3 of those 4. So, they'd have to either say no to Cam Lewis instead of Dee Delaney or roster 5, but obviously one injury changes all of this. But I am not sleeping on Dee Delaney. I think that he's got a reasonable chance and has experience and has versatility. He's intriguing to me. So is Tre McKitty at tight end. Tre McKitty is 25 years old, was a 2021 third-round pick by the Chargers. Recent third-round pick. In first 2 seasons with LA, 28 games played, 12 starts in 2 seasons. He was waived early in 2023, signed to the Bills practice squad, spent the season, or like the last half of the season on the Bills practice squad, and then he signed a futures deal. One thing that I always remember with Tre McKitty is a conversation that I had with an NFL scout on Tre McKitty. He was super high on McKitty coming out of college, and McKitty had a very quiet college career. 4 seasons, 56 total catches, 624 yards. Spent the first 3 seasons at Florida State. Then he transfers to Georgia for his last season. Has a very small role for Georgia. But this scout was like really high on him. He was hyping him up. I'm like, are we serious right now? And then he winds up being a top 100 pick. And I was like, okay, all right, maybe there's something here. And got a chance to get some run early with the Chargers, of course, waived after during year 3. I don't think that Tre McKitty can beat out Quintin Morris for the tight end 3 job, but he's one snap away, right? One snap away from something happening to Kincaid, Knox, or Q Morris, and Tre McKitty is going to be on this roster. So I'm aware of this possibility, and he's on my radar. Interested to watch him in preseason this year. The next guy is running back Frank Gore Jr., 22 years old, an undrafted free agent rookie out of Southern Mississippi. Very similar to the Tre McKitty conversation in that the Bills are going to roster 3 tight ends, just like the Bills are going to roster 3 running backs. James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson. I don't think Frank Gore Jr. can beat out any of them, but he's one snap away from being on this roster. The only other running back on the team is Darrynton Evans, and Darrynton Evans has been cut 7 times since being a third-round pick in 2020. So he's far from anybody's roster lock. Now, Frank Gore has his own limitations. He's small, 5'8", 198 pounds. An RAS score of a 0.6. I've never seen one that low. Small and slow is not the combination you're looking for to be an NFL player, but was productive in college, over 4,000 yards and 26 touchdowns across 4 seasons. He's tough and physical, and he's going to get a great opportunity to showcase himself throughout camp and preseason. And the Bills gave him a decent amount of money in terms of signing bonus as an undrafted free agent. Again, one snap away. So I'm keeping an eye on him. And the last player that I want to bring up, I have a hard time calling him a sleeper because I think the path is wide open for him to make the roster. But it would be the first time he made the roster, and that's Jamarcus Ingram, the cornerback. I mean, the Bills, if they roster 4 outside corners, Jamarcus Ingram's going to make it. You got Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas, Kyer Elam, and the 4th guy is Jamarcus Ingram. Kyron Brown's his most meaningful competition, and then some undrafted free agents. And keeping in mind, Jamarcus Ingram has spent the last 2 seasons on the Bills practice squad. And I thought he was awesome at training camp last year. I really enjoyed him. I think he's had 2 good preseasons already for the Bills. He's appeared in 5 regular season games for the Bills over the last 2 seasons. So Jamarcus Ingram, I mean, I label him a sleeper, but it's kind of hard to envision the path for him not making the roster. I think the path for him to not make the roster is this. The Bills roster, of course, 3 outside corners instead of 4. Benford, Douglas, Elam. And what they do is they roster a 5th safety, and that 5th safety is either Cam Lewis or Dee Delaney, who they think can also play outside corner in a pinch. And that's the path, right? Outside of that, I think Ingram's going to make it a CB4. So it should be fascinating. Training camp is just a few weeks away. And, I love exploring this team from every imaginable lens and angle. That's what we do. I mean, we have plenty of time here on this podcast. We are daily all year long, including the 6 weeks from OTAs to training camp. And so I try to find as many creative angles as I can to discuss this team, including, obviously a great conversation that I had in our subtext that inspired this. But I thought this was a unique and intriguing way to consider this team. I could talk about Greg Rousseau and Terrel Bernard all day long, and we're going to have those conversations. But these guys matter too, right? I mean, we're talking about guys that could be knocking on the door of making this team and getting a jersey on game day and having a real impact for this 2024 season. I'd be willing to bet that some of these guys do make it, right? Like, they're not all long shots. It's never chalk. That's one thing. I say it all the time, but whether you're predicting games in the NFL, you're predicting rosters, you're predicting stats, whatever, it's never just, hey, the most logical thing, right? Like, this makes the most sense. That's what's going to happen. It's never that way. These are real human beings that, they change and evolve, and that influences how things are perceived and the decisions that are made in terms of who makes the roster. So there you have it, folks. My sleepers for the roster in 2024. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you'll come back. I hope that you'll take a second to rate, review, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.